Chapter 13 of The Maid of Maiden Lane by Amelia E. Barr. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. The New Days Come. One afternoon in the late autumn, Annie was sitting watching Hyde playing with his dog, a big mastiff of noble birth and character. The creature sat erect with his head leaning against Hyde, and Hyde's arm was thrown around his neck as he talked to him of their adventures on the Broad that day. Annie's small face, though delicate and fragile-looking, was full of peace, and her eyes, soft and deep and heavenly, held thoughts that linked her with heaven. Outside there was in the air that November feeling which chills like the passing breath of death. The deserted garden looked sad and closed in, and everywhere there was a sense of the languishing end of the year, of the fading and dropping of all living things. But in the house Annie and Hyde and the dog sat within the circle of warmth and light made by the blazing ash logs, and in that circle there was at least an atmosphere of sweet content. Suddenly George looked up, and his eyes caught those of Annie watching him.
"What have you been reading, Annie?"
he asked as he stooped forward and took a thin volume from her lap.
"Why, 'tis Paul and Virginia. Do you indeed read love stories?"
"Yes. The mystery of a love affair pleases everyone, and I think we shall not tire of love stories till we tire of the mystery of spring, or of primroses and daffodils. Everyone I know takes their tale of love to be quite a new tale."
"Love has been cruel to me. It has made a cloud on my life that will help to cover me in my grave."
"You still love Cornelia?"
"I cannot cure myself of a passion so hopeless. However, as I see no end to my unhappiness, I try to submit to what I cannot avoid. What is the use of longing for that which I have no hope to get?"
"My uncle grows anxious for you to marry. He would be glad to see the succession of Hyde assured."
"Oh, indeed, I have no mind to take a wife. I hear every day that some of my acquaintance have married. I hear of none that have done worse."
"You believe nothing of what you say. My uncle was much pleased with Sarah Capel. What did you think of the beauty?"
"Cornelia has made all other women so indifferent to me, that if I cannot marry her, my father may dispose of me as he chooses."
"Cannot you forget Cornelia?"
"It is impossible. Every day I resolve to think of her no more, and then I continue thinking, and every day I am more and more in love with her. Her very name moves me beyond words."
"There is no name, George, however sweet and dear, however lovingly spoken, whose echo does not at last grow faint."
"Cornelia will echo in my heart as long as my heart beats."
Then they were silent, and Hyde drew his dog closer and watched the blaze among some lighter branches which a servant had just brought in. At his entrance he had also given Annie a letter, which she was eagerly reading. Hyde had no speculation about it, and even when he found Annie regarding him with her whole soul in her face, he failed to understand, as he always had done, the noble love which had been so long and so faithfully his, a love holding itself above endearments, self-repressed, self-sacrificing, kept down in the innermost heart-chamber a dignified prisoner behind very real bars. Yet he was conscious that letter was of more than usual interest, and when the servant had closed the door behind him, he asked,
"Whom is your letter from, Annie? It seems to please you very much."
She leaned forward to him with the paper in her little trembling hand and said,
"It is from Cornelia."
"My God!"
he ejaculated, and the words were fraught with such feeling as could have found no other vehicle of expression.
"She has sent you, dear George, a copy of the letter you ought to have received more than 2 years ago. Read it."
His eyes ran rapidly over the sweet words, his face flamed, his hands trembled. He cried out impetuously,
"But what does it mean? Am I quite in my senses? How has this letter been delayed? Why do I get only a copy?"
"Because Mr. Van Ariens has the original."
"Oh, it is all incredible. What do you mean, Annie? Do not keep me in such torturing suspense."
It means that Mr. Van Ariens asked Cornelia to marry him on the same day that you wrote to her about your marriage. She answered both letters in the same hour and misdirected them.
Oh, God's death! How can I punish so mean a scoundrel? I will have my letter from him, if I follow him round the world for it.
You have your letter now. I asked Cornelia to write it again for you, and you see she has done it gladly.
Angel of goodness! But I will have my first letter.
It has been in that man's keeping for more than 2 years. I would not touch it. 'Twould infect a gentleman, and make of him a rascal just as base.
He shall write me then an apology in his own blood. I will make him do it at the point of my sword.
If I were you, I would scorn to wet my sword in blood so base.
Remember, Annie, what this darling girl suffered. For his treachery she nearly died. I speak not of my own wrong. It is as nothing to hers.
However, she might have been more careful.
Annie, she was in the happy hurry of love. Your calm soul knows not what a confusing thing that is. She made a mistake, and that sneaking villain turned her mistake into a crime. By God's mercy, it is found out. But how? Annie, how much I owe you. What can I say? What can I do?
Be reasonable. Mary Donna really found it out. His guilty, restless conscience forced him to tell her the story, though to be sure he put the wrong on people he did not name. But I knew so much of the mystery of your love-sorrow as to put the 2 stories together and find them fit. Then I wrote to Cornelia.
How long ago?
About 2 months.
Why, then, did you not give me hope ere this?
I would not give you hope till hope was certain. 2 years is a long time in a girl's life. It was a possible thing for Cornelia to have forgotten, to have changed.
Impossible, quite impossible. She could not forget. She could not change. Why did you not tell me? I should have known her heart by mine own.
I wished to be sure,
repeated Annie a little sadly.
Forgive me, dear Annie, but this news throws me into an unspeakable condition. You see that I must leave for America at once.
No, I did not see that, George.
But if you consider...
I have been considering for 2 months. Let me decide for you now, for you are not able to do so wisely. Write at once to Cornelia. That is your duty as well as your pleasure. But before you go to her, there are things indispensable to be done. Will you ask Dr. Moran for his child, and not be able to show him that you can care for her as she deserves to be cared for? Lawyers will not be hurried. There will be consultations, and engrossings, and signings. And love, in your case, will have to wait upon law.
'Tis hard for love, and harder perhaps for anger to wait. For I am in a passion of wrath at Van Ariens. Oh, I long to be near him. Oh, what suffering his envy and hatred have caused others.
And himself also, be sure of that, or he had not tried to find some ease in a kind of confession. Dr. Roslyn will tell you that it is an eternal law that wherever sin is, sorrow will answer it.
The man is hateful to me.
He has done a thing that makes him hateful, but perhaps for all that he has been so miserable about it as to have the pity of the uncondemning one. I hear your father coming. I am sure you will have his sympathy in all things.
She left the room as the Earl entered it. He was in unusually high spirits. Some political news had delighted him, and without noticing his son's excitement, he said,
"The Commons have taken things in their own hands, George. I said they would. They listen to the King and the Lords very respectfully, and then obey themselves. Most of the men in the lower house are unfit to enter it."
Well, sir, the Lords as a rule send them there. You have sent 3 of them yourself. And unfit men in public places. Suppose prior unfitness in those who have the place to dispose of. But the government is not interesting. I have something else, father, to think about.
Indeed, I think the government is extremely interesting. It is very like 3 horses arranged in tandem fashion. First, you know, the king, a little out of the reach of the whip. Then the lords follow the king, and the commons are in the shafts. A more ignoble position, but yet, as we see today, possessing a special power of upsetting the coach.
Father, I have very important news from America. Will you listen to it?
Yes, if you will tell it to me straight, and not blunder about your meaning.
Sir, I have just discovered that a letter sent to me more than 2 years ago has been knowingly and purposely detained from me.
By whom?
A man into whose hands it fell by misdirection.
Did the letter contain means of identifying it as belonging to you?
Ample means.
Then the man is outside your recognition. You might as well go to the bridewell and seek a second among its riff-raff of scoundrels. Tell me shortly whom it concerns.
Miss Moran.
Oh, indeed. Are we to have that subject opened again?
His face darkened, and George, with an impetuosity that permitted no interruption, told the whole story. As he proceeded, the Earl became interested, then sympathetic. He looked with moist eyes at the youth so dear to him, and saw that his heart was filled with the energy and tenderness of his love. His handsome face, his piercingly bright eyes, his courteous but obstinately masterful manner, his almost boyish passion of anger and impatience, his tall, serious figure, erect as if ready for opposition, even that sentiment of deadly steel of being impatient to toss his sheath from his sword, pleased very much the elder man, and won both his respect and his admiration. He felt that his son had rights all his own, and that he must cheerfully and generously allow them.
George,
he answered,
you have won my approval. You have shown me that you can suffer and be faithful, and the girl, able to inspire such an affection, must be worthy of it. What do you wish to do?
I am going to America by the next packet.
Sit down. Then we can talk without feeling that every word is a last word, and full of hurry and therefore of unreason. You desire to see Miss Moran without delay. That is very natural.
Yes, sir. I am impatient also to get my letter.
I think that of no importance.
What would you have done in my case, and at my age, father?
Something extremely foolish. I should have killed the man, or been killed by him. I hope that you have more sense. Society does not now compel you to answer insult with murder. The noble not caring of the spirit is beyond the mere passion of the animal. What does Annie say?
Annie is an angel. I walk far below her, and I hate the man who has so wronged Cornelia. I think, sir, you must also hate him.
I hate nobody. God send that I may be treated the same. George, you have flashed your sword only in a noble quarrel. Will you now stain it with the blood of a man below your anger or consideration? You have had your follies, and I have smiled at them, knowing well that a man who has no follies in his youth will have in his maturity no power. But now you have come of age, not only in years, but in suffering cheerfully endured and well outlived, so I may talk to you as a man, and not command you as a father.
What do you wish me to do, sir?
I advise you to write to Miss Moran at once. Tell her you are more anxious now to redeem your promise than ever you were before. Say to her that I already look upon her as a dear daughter, and am taking immediate steps to settle upon you the American manor, and also such New York property as will provide for the maintenance of your family in the state becoming your order and your expectations. Tell her that my lawyers will go to this business tomorrow, and that as soon as the deeds are in your hand, you will come and ask for the interview with Dr. Moran, so long and cruelly delayed.
My dear father, how wise and kind you are.
It is my desire to be so, George. You cannot, after this unfortunate delay, go to Dr. Moran without the proofs of your ability to take care of his daughter's future.
How soon can this business be accomplished?
In about 3 weeks, I should think. But wait your full time, and do not go without the credentials of your position. This 3 or 4 weeks is necessary to bring to perfection the waiting of 2 years.
I will take your advice, sir. I thank you for your generosity.
All that I have is yours, George, and you can write to this dear girl every day in the interim. Go now and tell her what I say. I had other dreams for you, as you know. They are over now. I have awakened.
Dear Annie,
ejaculated George.
Dear Annie,
replied the Earl with a sigh.
She is one of the daughters of God, and I am not worthy to call her mine, but I have sat at her feet and learned how to love and how to forgive, and how to bear disappointment. I will tell you that when Colonel Say insulted me last year, and I felt for my sword and would have sent him a letter on its point, Annie stepped before him. "Forget and go on, dear uncle," she said, and I did so with a proud, sore heart at first, but quite cheerfully in a week or 2, and at the last hunt dinner he came to me with open hand, and we ate and drank together, and are now firm friends. Yet but for Annie, one of us might be dead, and the other flying like Cain, exiled and miserable. Think of these things, George. The good of being a son is to be able to profit from your father's mistakes.
They parted with a hand-clasp that went to both hearts, and as Hyde passed his mother's loom he went in and told her all that happened to him. She listened with a smile and a heartache. She knew now that the time had come to say farewell to the boy who had made her life for 27 years. He must marry like the rest of the world and go away from her, and only mothers know what supreme self-sacrifice a pleasant acquiescence in this event implies. But she bravely put down all the clamouring selfishness of her long, sweet care and affection, and said cheerfully,
"Very much to my liking is Cornelia Moran. She is world-like and heaven-like, and her good heart and sweet nature every one knows. A loving wife and a noble mother she will make. And if I must lose thee, my Joris, there is no girl in America that I like better to have thee."
Never will you lose me, mother.
Ah, then, that is what all sons say. The common lot, I look for nothing better. But see now, I give thee up cheerfully. If God please, I shall see thy sons and daughters, and thy father has been anxious about the Hydes. He would not have a stranger here, nor would I. Our hope is in thee and thy sweet wife, and very glad am I that thy wife is to be Cornelia Moran.
And even after Joris had left her she smiled, though the tears dropped down on her work. She thought of the presents she would send her daughter, and she told herself that Cornelia was an American, and that she had made for her with her own hands and brain a lovely home wherein her memory must always dwell. Indeed, she let her thoughts go far forward to see, and to listen to the happy boys and girls who might run and shout gleefully through the large fair rooms and the sweet shady gardens her skill and taste had ordered and planted. Thus her generosity made her a partaker of her children's happiness. And whoever partakes of a pleasure has his share of it, and comes into contact not only with the happiness, but with the other partakers of that happiness, a divine kind of interest for generous deeds, which we all may appropriate. Nothing is more contagious than joy, and Hyde was now a living joy through all the house. His voice had caught a new tone, his feet a more buoyant step. He carried himself like a man expectant of some glorious heritage. So eager, so ardent, so ready to be happy, he inspired everyone with his buoyant gladness of heart. He could at least talk to Cornelia with his pen every day, every hour if he desired, and if it had been possible to transfer in a letter his own light-heartedness, the words he wrote would have shone upon the paper. The next morning Mary Damer called. She knew that a letter from Cornelia was possible, and she knew also that it would really be as fateful to herself as to Hyde. If, as she suspected, it was Rem Van Ariens who had detained the misdirected letter, there was only one conceivable result as regarded herself. She, an upright, honourable English girl, loving truth with all her heart, and despising whatever was underhand and disloyal, had but one course to take. She must break off her engagement with a man so far below her standard of simple morality. She could not trust his honour, and what security has love in a heart without honour? She looked anxiously at Annie as she entered, and Annie would not keep her in suspense.
"There was a letter from Miss Moran last night," she
said.
"She loves George yet. She rewrote the unfortunate letter, and this time it found its owner. I think he has it next his heart at this very moment."
"I'm glad of that, Annie. But who was the first letter?"
"I think you know, Mary."
"You mean Mr. Van Ariens?"
"Yes."
"There is no more to be said. I shall write to him as soon as possible."
"I am sorry."
"No, no. Be content, Annie. The right will always come right. Neither you nor I desire any other end, even to our own love story."
"But you must suffer."
"Not much. None of us weep if we lose what is of no value. And I have noticed that the happiness of anyone is always conditioned by the unhappiness of someone else. Love usually builds his home out of the wrecks of other homes. Your cousin and Cornelia will be happy, but there are others that must suffer that they may be so. I will go now, Annie, because until I've written to Mr. Van Ariens, I shall not feel free. And also, I do not wish him to come here, and in his last letter he spoke of such intention."
So the two letters, that of Hyde to Cornelia and that of Mary Damer to Van Ariens, left England for America in the same packet. And though Mary Damer undoubtedly had some suffering and disappointment to conquer, the fight was all within her. To her friends at the Manor she was just the same bright, courageous girl, ready for every emergency, and equally ready to make the most of every pleasure. And the tone of the Manor House was now set to a key of the highest joy and expectation. Hyde unconsciously struck the note, for he was happily busy from morning to night about affairs relating either to his marriage or to his future as the head of a great household. All his old exigent, extravagant liking for rich clothing returned to him. He had constant visits from his London tailor, a dapper little artist who brought with him a profusion of rich cloth, silk and satin, and who firmly believed that the tailor made the man. There were also endless interviews with the family lawyer, endless reading of law papers, and endless consultations about rights and successions, which Hyde was glad and grateful to leave very much to his father's wisdom and generosity. At the beginning of this happy period, Hyde had been sure that the business of his preparations would be arranged in 3 weeks. A month had appeared to be a quite unreasonable and impossible delay. But the month passed, and it was nearly the middle of November when all things were ready for his voyage. His mother would then have urged a postponement until spring, but she knew that George would brook no further delay, and she was wise enough to accept the inevitable cheerfully. And thus, by letting her will lead her in the very road necessity drove her, she preserved not only her liberty but her desire. Some of these last days were occupied in selecting from her jewels presents for Cornelia, with webs of gold and silver tissue, and Spitalfield silk so rich and heavy that no mortal woman might hope to outwear them. To these Annie added from her own store of lace many very valuable pieces, and the bridegroom was proud to see that love was going to send him away with both arms full for the beloved. The best gift, however, came last, and it was from the Earl. It was not gold or land, though he gave generously of both of these, but one which Hyde felt made his way straight before him, and which he knew must have cost his father much self-abnegation. It was the following letter to Dr. John Moran.
My dear Sir, it seems then that our dear children love each other so well that it is beyond our right, even as parents, to forbid their marriage. I ask from you for my son, who is a humble and ardent suitor for Miss Moran's hand, all the favour his sincere devotion to her deserves. We have both been young, we have both loved. Accept, then, his affection as some atonement for any grievance or injustice you remember against myself. Had we known each other better, we should doubtless have loved each other better, But now that marriage will make us kin, I offer you my hand, with all it implies of regret for the past, and of respect for the future. Your servant to command, Richard Hyde. It is the greatest proof of my love I can give you, George,
said the Earl when the letter had been read.
And it is Annie you must thank for it. She dropped the thought into my heart, and if the thought has silently grown to these written words, it is because she had put many other good thoughts there, and that these helped this one to come to perfection.
Have you noticed, Father, how small and fragile-looking she is? Can she really be slowly dying?
No, she is not dying. She is only going a little further away every hour. Some hour she will be called, and she will answer, and we shall see her no more here. But do not call that dying, and if it be dying, Annie will go as calmly and simply as if she were fulfilling some religious rite or duty. She loves God, and she will go to him.
The next morning Hyde left his father's home forever. It was impossible that such a parting should be happy. No hopes, no dreams of future joy could make him forget the wealth of love he was leaving, nor did he wish to forget. And woe to the man or woman who would buy composure and contentment by forgetting, by really forfeiting a portion of their existence, by being a suicide of their own moral nature. The day was a black winter day, with a monotonous rain and a dark sky troubled by a ghostly wind. Inside the house the silence fell on the heart like a weight. The Earl and Countess watched their son's carriage turn from the door, and then looked silently into each other's faces. The Earl's lips were firmly set, and his eyes were full of tears. The Countess was weeping bitterly. He went with her to her room, and with all his old charm and tenderness comforted her for her great loss. In that moment Annie was forgotten, yet no one was suffering more than she was. Hyde had knelt by her sofa, and taken her in his arms, and covered her face with tears and kisses, and she had not been able to oppose a parting so heartbreaking and so final. The last tears she was ever to shed dropped from her closed eyes as she listened to his departing steps, and the roll of the carriage carrying him away forever seemed to roll over her shrinking heart. She cried out feebly, a pitiful little shrill cry that she hushed with a sob still more full of anguish. Then she began to cast over her suffering soul the balm of prayer, and prostrate with closed eyes and hands feebly hanging down, Dr. Roslyn found her. He did not need to ask a question. He had long known the brave self-sacrifice that was consecrating the child heart suffering so sharply that day, and he said only,
"We are made perfect through suffering, Annie."
I know, dear father.
"And you have found it before this, that the sorrow well born is full of strange joys, joys whose long-lasting perfumes show that they were grown in heaven and not on earth."
This is the last sorrow that can come to me, father.
"And, my dear Annie, you would have been a loser without it. Every grief has its meaning, and the web of life could not be better woven, if only love touched it."
I have been praying, father.
"Nay, but God himself prayed in you, while your soul waited in deep resignation. God gave you both the resignation and the answer."
My heart failed me at the last. Then I prayed as well as I could.
"And then, visited by the not yourself in you, your head was lifted up. Do not be frightened at what you want. Strive for it little by little. All that is bitter in outward things, or in interior things, all that befalls you in the course of a day, is your daily bread, if you will take it from his hand."
Then she was silent and quite still, and he sat and watched the gradual lifting of the spirit's cloud, watched until the pallor of her face grew luminous with the inner light, and her wide-open eyes saw, as in a vision, things invisible to mortal sight, but open to the spirit on that dazzling line where mortal and immortal verge. And as he went home, stepping slowly through the misty world, he himself hardly knew whether he was in the body or out of it. He felt not the dripping rain, he was not conscious of the encompassing earthly vapours. He had passed within the veil, and was worshipping in dazzling temples open straight to him, where one who had great lightnings for his crown was suddenly made present, vast and dim through crowded pinions of the cherubim. And his feet stumbled not, nor was he aware of anything around, until the Earl met him at the park gates, and touching him said reverently,
"Father, you are close to the highway. Have you seen Annie?"
I have just left her.
"She is further from us than ever."
"Richard Hyde,"
he answered.
"She is on her way to God, and she can rest nothing short of that."
End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of The Maid of Maiden Lane by Amelia E. Barr. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Hush, love is here. On the morning that Hyde sailed for America, Cornelia received the letter he had written her on the discovery of Rem's dishonourable conduct. So much love, so much joy, sent to her in the secret foldings of a sheet of paper. In a hurry of delight and expectation she opened it, and her beaming eyes ran all over the joyful words it brought her, sweet fluttering pages that his breath had moved and his face had been aware of. How he would have rejoiced to see her pressing them to her bosom at some word of fonder memory or desire. There was much in this letter which it was necessary her father and mother should hear, the Earl's message to them, Hyde's own proposition for an immediate marriage, and various necessities referring to this event. But she was proud and happy to read words of such noble, straightforward affection, and the doctor was especially pleased by the deference expressed for his wishes. When he left the house that day, he kissed his daughter with pride and tenderness, and said to Mrs. Moran,
"Ava, there will be much to get, and much to do in a short time, but money manages all things. Do not spare where it is necessary." And
then what important and interesting consultations followed. What lists of lovely garments became imperative, which an hour before had not been dreamed of. What discussions as to mantua makers and milliners, as to guests and ceremonies, as to all the details of a life unknown, but invested by love and youth with a delightfully overwhelming importance. Cornelia was so happy that her ordinary dress of grey camelot did not express her. She felt constrained to add to it some bows of bright scarlet ribbon. And then she looked round about her room and went through her drawers to find something else to be a visible witness to the light heart singing within her. And she came across some coral combs that Madame Jacobus had given her, and felt their vivid colouring in the shining masses of her dark hair to be one of the right ways of saying to herself and all she loved,
"See how happy I am."
In the afternoon, when the shopping for the day had been accomplished, she went to Captain Jacobus to play with him the game of backgammon which had become almost a daily duty, and to which the captain attached a great importance. Indeed, for many weeks it had been the event of every day to him, and if he was no longer dependent on it, he was grateful enough to acknowledge all the good it had done him.
"I owe your daughter as much as I owe you, sir,"
he would say to Dr. Moran.
"And I owe both of you a bigger debt than I can clear myself of."
This afternoon he looked at his visitor with a wondering speculation. There was something in her face and manner and voice he had never before seen or heard, and Madame, who watched every expression of her husband, was easily led to the same observation. She observed Cornelia closely, and her gay laugh especially revealed some change. It was like the burst of bird-song in early spring, and she followed the happy girl to the front door and called her back when she had gone down the steps, and said as she earnestly looked in her face,
"You have heard from Joris Hyde? I know you have."
And Cornelia nodded her head, and blushed and smiled, and ran away from further questions. When she reached home she found Madame Van Heemskirk sitting with her mother, and the sweet old lady rose to meet her, and said before Cornelia could utter a word,
"Come to me, Cornelia. This morning a letter we have had from my Joris, and sorry am I that I did thee so much wrong."
"Madame, I have long ago forgotten it, and there was a mistake all around,"
answered Cornelia cheerfully.
"That is so, and thy mistake first of all. Hurry is misfortune. Even to be happy it is not wise to hurry. Listen now. Joris has written to his grandfather, and also to me, and very busy he will keep us both. His grandfather is to look after the stables and the horses, and to buy more horses, and to hire serving men of all kinds. And a long letter also I have had from my daughter Catherine, and she tells me to make her duty to thee my duty. That is my pleasure also, and I have been talking with thy mother about the house. Now I shall go there, and a very pleasant home I shall make it. Many things Joris will bring with him. 2 new carriages and much fine furniture, and I know not what else beside.
Then Cornelia kissed Madame, and afterwards removed her bonnet, and Madame looked at her smiling. The vivid coral in her dark hair, the modest grey dress with its knots of colour, and above all the lovely face alight with love and hope, delighted her.
Very pretty art thou, very pretty indeed,
she said impulsively, and then she added,
Many other girls are very pretty also, but my Joris loves thee, and I am glad that it is thee, and very welcome art thou to me, and very proud is my husband of thee. And now I must go, because there is much to do, and little time to do it in.
For nearly a week Cornelia was too busy to take Arenta into her consideration. She did not care to tell her about Rem's cruel and dishonourable conduct, and she was afraid the shrewd little Marquise would divine some change and get the secret out of her. Indeed, Arenta was not long in suspecting something unusual in the doctor's household. The number of parcels and of work-people astonished her, and she was not a little offended at Madame Van Heemskirk spending a whole afternoon so near to her, and
"Never even,"
as she said to her father,
"turning her head this way."
For Arenta had drunk a rather long draught of popular interest, and she could not bear to believe it was declining. Was she not the American heroine of 1793? It was almost a want of patriotism in Madame Van Heemskirk to neglect her. After a week had elapsed, Cornelia went over one morning to see her friend, but by this time Arenta knew everything. Her brother Rem had been with her and confessed all to his sister. It had not been a pleasant meeting by any means. She heard the story with indignation, but contrived to feel that somehow Rem was not so much to blame as Cornelia and other people.
"You are right served,"
she said to her brother,
"for meddling with foreigners, and especially for mixing your love affairs up with an English girl. Proud, haughty creatures, all of them. And you are a very fool to tell any woman such a crime. Yes, it is a crime. I won't say less. That girl over the way nearly died, and you would have let her die. It was a shame. I don't love Cornelia, but it was a shame."
"The letter was addressed to me, Arenta."
"Fiddlesticks! You knew it was not yours. You knew it was Hyde's. Where is it now?"
She asked the question in her usual dominant way, and Rem did not feel able to resist it. He looked for a moment at the angry woman, and was subdued by her air of authority. He opened his pocket-book, and from a receptacle in it took the fateful letter. She seized and read it, and then without a word or a moment's hesitation threw it into the fire. Rem blustered and fumed, and she stood smiling defiantly at him.
"You are like all criminals. You must keep something to accuse yourself with. I love you too well to permit you to carry that bit of paper about you. It has worked you harm enough. What are you going to do? Is Miss Damer's refusal quite final?"
"Quite. It was even scornful."
"Plenty of nice girls in Boston."
"I cannot go back to Boston."
"Why then?"
"Because Mary's cousin has told the whole affair."
"Nonsense."
"She has, I know it. Men whom I had been friendly with got out of my way. Women excused themselves at their homes, and did not see me on the streets. I have no doubt all Boston is talking of the affair."
"Then come back to New York. New Yorkers attend strictly to their own love affairs. Father will stand by you, and I will."
"Father will not. He called me a scoundrel when I told him last night, and advised me to go to the frontier. Joris Van Heemskirk will not talk, but Madame will chatter for him, and I could not bear to meet Dr. Moran. As for Captain Jacobus, he would invent new words and oaths to abuse me with, and Aunt Angelica would, of course, say amen to all he says. And there are others."
"Yes, there is Lord Hyde."
"Curse him! But I intended to give him his letter. Now you have burnt it."
"You intended nothing of the kind, Rem. Go away as soon as you can. I don't want to know where you go just yet. New York is impossible, and Boston is impossible. Father says go to the frontier. I say go south. What you have done, and it cannot be undone. So don't carry it about with you. And I would let women alone. They are beyond you. Go in for politics."
That day Rem lingered with his sister, seeing no one else, and in the evening shadows he slipped quietly away. He was very wretched, for he had really loved Mary Damer, and his disappointment was bitterly keen and humiliating. Besides which, he felt that his business efforts for 2 years were forfeited, and that he had the world to begin over again. Without a friend to wish him a Godspeed, the wretched man went on board the southern packet, and in her dim, lonely cabin sat silent and despondent, while she fought her way through swaying curtains of rain to the open sea. Its great complaining came up through the darkness to him, and it seemed to be the very voice of the miserable circumstances that had separated and estranged his life from all he loved and desired. This sudden destruction of all her hopes for her brother distressed Arenta. Her own marriage had been a most unfortunate one, but its misfortunes had the importance of national tragedy. She had even plucked honour to herself from the bloody tumbrel and guillotine, but Rem's matrimonial failure had not one redeeming quality. It was altogether a shameful and well-deserved retribution. And she had boasted to her friends not a little of the great marriage her brother was soon to make, and even spoken of Miss Damer as if a sisterly affection already existed between them. She could anticipate very well the smiles and shrugs, the exclamations and condolences she might have to encounter, and she was not pleased with her brother for putting her in a position likely to make her disagreeable to people. But the heart of her anger was Cornelia.
But for that girl,
Rem would have married Mary Damer, and his home in Boston might have been full of opportunities for her, as well as a desirable change when she wearied of New York. Altogether it was a hard thing for her, as well as a dreadful sorrow for Rem, and she could not think of Cornelia without anger.
Just for her,
she kept saying as she dressed herself with elaborate simplicity.
Just for her. Very much she intruded herself into my affairs. My marriage was her opportunity with Lord Hyde, and now all she can do is break up poor Rem's marriage.
When Cornelia entered the Van Ariens' parlour, Arenta was already there. She was dressed in a gown of the blackest and softest bombazine and crape. It had a distinguishing want of all ornament, but it was for that reason singularly effective against her delicate complexion and pale golden hair. She looked offended, and hardly spoke to her old friend, but Cornelia was prepared for some exhibition of anger. She had not been to see Arenta for a whole week, and she did not doubt she had been well aware of something unusual in progress. But that Rem had accused himself did not occur to her, therefore she was hardly prepared for the passionate accusations with which Arenta assailed her.
I think you have behaved disgracefully to poor Rem. You would not have him yourself, and yet you prevent another girl, whom he loves far better than ever he loved you, from marrying him. He has gone away out of the world, he says, and indeed I should not wonder if he kills himself. It is most certain you have done all you can to drive him to it.
Arenta, I have no idea what you mean. I have not seen Rem nor written to Rem for more than 2 years.
Very likely, but you have written about him. You wrote to Miss Damer, and told her Rem purposely kept a letter which you had sent to Lord Hyde.
I did not write to Miss Darner. I do not know the lady. But Rem did keep a letter that belonged to Lord Hyde.
Then anger gave falsehood the bit, and she answered,
Rem did not keep any letter that belonged to Lord Hyde. Prove that he did so before you accuse him. You cannot.
I unfortunately directed Lord Hyde's letter to Rem, and Rem's letter to Lord Hyde. Rem knew that he had Lord Hyde's letter, and he should have taken it at once to him.
Lord Hyde had Rem's letter. He ought to have taken it at once to Rem.
There was not a word in Rem's letter to identify it as belonging to him.
Then you ought to be ashamed to write love letters that would do for any man that received them. A poor hand you must be to blunder over 2 love letters. I have had 8 and 10 at once to answer, and I never failed to distinguish each. And while rivers run into the sea, I never shall misdirect my love letters. I do not believe Rem ever got your letter, and I will not believe it either, now or ever. I dare be bound Balthazar lost it on the way. Prove to me he did not.
Oh, indeed, I think you know better.
Very clever is Lord Hyde to excuse himself by throwing the blame on poor Rem. Very mean indeed to accuse him to the girl he was going to marry. To be sure, anyone with an ounce of common sense to guide them must see through the whole affair.
Arenta, I have the most firm conviction of Rem's guilt, and the greatest concern for his disappointment, I assure you I have.
Kindly reserve your concern, Miss Moran, till Rem Van Ariens asks for it. As for his guilt, there is no guilt in question. Even supposing that Rem did keep Lord Hyde's letter, what then? All things are fair in love and war. Willie Nichols told me last night he would keep 100 letters, if he thought he could win me by doing so. Any man of sense would.
All I blame Rem for is
that he asked you to marry him. So much for that. I hope if he meddles with women again, he will seek an all-around, common-sense Dutch girl who will know how to direct her letters, or else be content with one lover.
Arenta, I should go now. I have given you an opportunity to be rude and unkind. You cannot expect me to do that again."
She watched Cornelia across the street, and then turned to the mirror and wound her ringlets over her fingers.
"I don't care. It was her fault to begin with. She tempted Rem, and he fell. Men always fall when women tempt them. It is their nature to. I am going to stand by Rem, right or wrong. And I only wish I could tell Mary Damer what I think of her. She has another lover, of course she has, or she would not have talked about her honor to Rem."
To such thoughts she was raging when Peter Van Ariens came home to dinner, and she could not restrain them. He listened for a minute or two, and then struck the table no gentle blow.
"In my house, Arenta, I will have no such words. What you think, you think. But such thoughts must be shut close in your mind. In keeping that letter, I say Rem behaved like a scoundrel. He was cruel, and he was a coward. Because he is my son, I will not excuse him. No, indeed. For that very reason, the more angry I am at such a deed. Now then, he shall acknowledge to George Hyde and Cornelia Moran the wrong he did them, ere in my home and my heart he rights himself."
"Is Cornelia going to be married?"
"That is what I hear."
"To Lord Hyde?"
"That also is what I hear."
"Well, as I am in mourning, I cannot go to the wedding. So then I am delighted to have told her a little of my mind."
"It is a great marriage for the doctor's daughter. A countess she will be."
"And a marquise I am. And will you please say if either countess or marquise is better than mistress or madam? Thank all the powers that be. I have learned the value of a title, and I shall change marquise for mistress as soon as I can do so."
"If always you had thought thus, a great deal of sorrow we had both been spared."
"Well then, a girl cannot get her share of wisdom till she comes to it. After all, I am now sorry I've quarreled with Cornelia. In New York and Philadelphia she will be a great woman."
"To take offense is a great folly, and to give offense is a great folly. I know not which is the greater, Arenta."
"Oh, indeed, father, if I am hurt and angry, I shall take the liberty to say so. Anger that is hidden cannot be gratified, and if people use me badly, it is my way to tell them I am aware of it. One may be obliged to eat brown bread, but I, for one, will say it is brown bread and not white."
"Your own way you will take, until into some great trouble you stumble."
"And then my own way I shall take, until out of it I stumble."
"I have told Rem what he must do. Like a man he must say, 'I did wrong, and I am sorry for it.' And so well I think of those he has wronged, as to be sure they will answer, 'It is forgiven.'"
"And forgotten."
"That is different. To forgive freely is what we owe to our enemy. To forget not is what we owe to ourselves."
"But if Rem's fault is forgiven, and not forgotten, what good will it do him? I have seen that everyone forgives much in themselves that they find unpardonable in other people."
"In so far, Arenta, we are all at fault."
"I think it is cruel, father, to ask Rem to speak truth to his own injury. Even the law is kinder than you. It asks no man to accuse himself."
"Right wrongs no man. Till others move in this matter, you be quiet. If you talk, evil words you will say. And mind this, Arenta, the evil that comes out of your lips into your own bosom will fall. All my life I have seen this."
But Arenta could not be quiet. She would sow thorns though she had to walk unshod, and her father's advice moved her no more than a breath moves a mountain. In the same afternoon she saw Madame Jacobus going to Dr. Moran's, and the hour she remained there was full of misery to her impetuous, self-adoring heart. She was sure they were talking of Rem and herself, and as she had all their conversation to imagine, she came to conclusions in accord with her suspicions. But she met her aunt at the door, and brought her eagerly into the parlour. She had had no visitors that day, and was bored and restless and longing for conversation.
"I saw you go to the doctor's an hour ago, aunt. I hope the captain is well."
"Jacobus is quite well, thank God, and Dr. Moran, and Cornelia. I've been looking at some of her wedding gowns. A girl so happy, and who deserves to be so happy, I never saw. What a darling she is."
"It is now the fashion to rave about her. I suppose they found time enough to abuse poor Rem. And you could listen to them. I would not have done so. No, not if listening had meant salvation for the whole Moran family.
You are a remarkably foolish young woman. They never named Rem. People so happy do not remember the bringer of sorrow. He has been shut out, in the darkness and cold. But I heard from Madame Van Heemskirk why Cornelia and that delightful young man were not married 2 years ago. I am ashamed of Rem. I can never forgive him. He is a disgrace to the family. And that is why I came here today. I wish you to make Rem understand that he must not come near his uncle Jacobus. When Jacobus is angry, he will call heaven and earth and hell to help him speak his mind, and I have nearly cured him of a habit which is so distressing to me, and such a great wrong to his own soul. The very sight of Rem would break every barrier down, and let a flood of words loose, that would make him suffer afterwards. I will not have Jacobus led into such temptation. I have not heard an oath from him for 6 months.
I suppose you would never forgive Jacobus, if you did hear one.
That is another matter. I hope I have a heart to forgive whatever Jacobus does or says. He is my husband.
It is then less wicked to blaspheme Almighty God than to keep one of Lord Hyde's love letters. One fault may be forgiven, the other is unpardonable. Dear me, how religiously ignorant I am! As for my uncle swearing, and the passions that thus express themselves, everybody knows that anything that distantly resembles good temper will suit Captain Jacobus.
You look extremely handsome when you are scornful, Arenta, but it is not worth while wasting your charms on me. I am doing what I can to help Jacobus keep his tongue clean, and I will not have Rem lead him into temptation. As for Rem, he is guilty of a great wrong, and he must now do what his father told him to do, work day and night as men work when a bridge is broken down. The ruin must be got out of the way, and the bridge rebuilt. Then it will be possible to open some pleasant and profitable traffic with human beings again, not to speak of heaven.
You are right, not to speak of heaven. I think heaven would be more charitable. Rem will not trouble Captain Jacobus. For my part, I think a man that cannot bear temptation is very poorly reformed. If my uncle could see Rem, and yet keep his big and little oaths under bonds, I should believe in his clean tongue.
Arenta, you are tormenting yourself with anger and ill will, and above all with jealousy. In this way you are going to miss a deal of pleasure. I advise you not to quarrel with Cornelia. She will be a great resource. I myself am looking forward to the delightful change Jacobus may have at Hyde Manor. It will make a new life for him, and also for me. This afternoon something is vexing you. I shall take no offence. You will regret your bad temper tomorrow.
Tomorrow Arenta did regret, but people do not always say they are sorry when they feel so. She sat in the shadow of her window curtains and watched the almost constant stream of visitors and messengers and tradespeople at Dr. Moran's house, and she longed to have her hands among the lovely things, and to give her opinion about the delightful event sure to make the next few weeks full of interest and pleasure. And after she had received a letter from Rem, she resolved to humble herself that she might be exalted.
Rem is already fortunate, and I can't help him by fighting his battle. Forgetfulness is the word, for this wrong can have no victory, and to be forgotten is the only hope for it. Beside, Cornelia had her full share in my happiness, and I will not let myself be defrauded of my share in her happiness. Not for a few words, no, certainly not.
This reflection, a few times reiterated, resulted in the following note.
My dear Cornelia, I want to say so much that I cannot say anything but forgive me. I am shaken to pieces by my dreadful sufferings, and sometimes I do not know what I say, even to those I love. Blame my sad fortune for my bad words, and tell me you long to forgive me, as I long to be forgiven. Your Arenta. That will be sufficient,
she reflected.
And after all, Cornelia is a sweet girl. I am her first and dearest friend, and I am determined to keep my place. It has made me very angry to see those Van Dien girls and those Sherman girls running in and out of the Moran house as if they owned Cornelia. Well then, if I have had to eat humble pie, I have had my say, and that takes the bitter taste out of my mouth. And a sensible woman must look to her future. I dare warrant Cornelia is now answering my letter. I dare warrant she will forgive me very sweetly.
She spent half an hour in such reflections, and then Cornelia entered with a smiling face. She would not permit Arenta to say another word of regret. She stifled all her self-reproaches in an embrace, and she took her back with her to her own home. And no further repentance embarrassed Arenta. She put her ready wit and her clever hands to a score of belated things, and snubbed and contradicted the Van Dien and Sherman girls into a respectful obedience to her earlier friendship and wider experience. Everything that she directed or took charge of went with an unmistakable vigour to completion, and even Madame Van Heemskirk was delighted with her ability and grateful for her assistance.
"The poor Arenta!"
she said to Mrs. Moran.
"Very helpful she is to us, and for her brother's fault she is not to blame. Wrong it would be to visit it on her."
And Arenta not only felt this gracious justice for herself, she looked much further forward, for she said to her father,
"It is really for Rem's sake I am so obliging. By and by people will say there is no truth in that letter story. The Marquise is the friend of Lady Hyde. They are like clasped hands, and that could not be so, if Rem Van Ariens had done such a dreadful thing. It is all nonsense. And if I hear a word about it, I shall know how to smile, and lift my shoulders, and kill suspicion with contempt. Yes, for Rem's sake, I have done the best thing."
So happily the time went on, and it appeared wonderful when Christmas was close at hand. Every preparation was then complete. The manor house was a very picture of splendid comfort, and day by day Cornelia's exquisite wardrobe came nearer to perfection. It was a very joy to go into the Moran house. The mother, with a happy light upon her face, went to and fro with that habitual sweet serenity which kept the temperature of expectant pleasure at a degree not too exhausting for continuance. The doctor was so satisfied with affairs that he was often heard timing his firm, strong steps to snatches of long-forgotten military songs, and Cornelia, knowing her lover was every day coming nearer and nearer, was just as happy as a girl loving and well-beloved ought to be. Sorrow was all behind her, and a great joy was coming to meet her. Until mortal love should become immortal, she could hope for no sweeter interlude in life. Her beauty had increased wonderfully. Hope had more than renewed her youth, and confident love had given to her face and form a splendour of colour and expression that captivated everybody. Though why or how they never asked, she charmed because she charmed. She was the love, the honey, the milk of sweetest human nature. One day the little bevy of feminine counsellors looked at their work and pronounced all beautiful and all finished. And then there was a lull in the busy household, and then everyone was conscious of being a little weary, and everyone also felt that it would be well to let heart and brain and fingers and feet rest. In a few days there would likely be another English letter, and they could then form some idea as to when Lord Hyde would arrive. The last letter received from him had been written in London, and the ship in which he was to sail was taking on her cargo, while he impatiently waited at his hotel for notice of her being ready to lift anchor. The doctor thought it highly probable that Hyde would follow this letter in a week, perhaps less. During this restful interval, Dr. and Mrs. Moran drove out one afternoon to Hyde Manor House. A message from Madame Van Heemskirk asked this favour from them. She wished naturally that they should see how exquisitely beautiful and comfortable was the home which her Joris had trusted her to prepare for his bride. But she did not wish Cornelia to see it until the bridegroom himself took her across its threshold.
"An old woman's fancy it is,"
she said to Mrs. Moran.
"But no harm is there in it, and not much do I like women who bustle about their houses and have no fancies at all."
"Nor I,"
answered Mrs. Moran with a merry little laugh.
"Do you know that I told John to buy my wedding ring too wide, because I often heard my mother say that a tight wedding ring was unlucky."
Then both women smiled, and began delightedly to look over the stores of fine linen and damask, which the mother of Joris had laid up for her son's use. It was a charming visit, and the sweet pause in the vivid life of the past few weeks was equally charming to Cornelia. She rested in her room till the short daylight ended. Then she went to the parlour and drank a cup of tea, and closed the curtains, and sat down by the hearth to wait for her father and mother. It was likely they would be a little late, but the moon was full and the sleighing perfect, and then she was sure they would have so much to tell her when they did reach home. So still was the house, so still was the little street, that she went easily to the land of reverie, and lost herself there. She thought over again all her life with her lover, recalled his sweet spirit, his loyal affection, his handsome face and enchanting manner.
"Heaven has made me so fortunate,"
she thought.
"and now my fortune has arrived at my wishes. Even his delay is sweet. I desire to think of him until all other thoughts are forgotten. Oh, what lover could be loved as I love him!"
Then with a soft but quick movement the door flew open. She lifted her eyes to fill them with love's very image and vesture, and with a cry of joy flew to meet the bliss so long afar but now so near.
"Oh, lovely and beloved, Oh, my love,
Hyde cried, and then there was a twofold silence, the very ecstasy that no mortal words can utter. The sacred hour for which all lives had longed was at last dropped down to them from heaven. Between their kisses they spoke of things remembered and of things to be, leaning into each other in visible sweetness, while love breathed in sighs and silences through two blent souls one rapturous undersong. End of chapter 14. End of The Maid of Maiden Lane by Amelia E. Barr. Recorded by LibriVox volunteers, April 2014.